Well, before I start, I'd like to thank Dave and Ramondo for organizing such an interesting project, giving us an opportunity to tell stories from days gone by. I think it's a wonderful effort, and many of you will probably consider doing this the next time around. I am a first-generation born Chinese American who was raised on New York City's Lower East Side of Manhattan. And many of you may know that that area was known to be a melting pot. A melting pot because there were so many diverse ethnic groups and cultural groups that lived in the projects. There were the blacks, the Hispanic, the Irish, the Italians, the Germans, the Chinese, and many, many others that lived there. In my time, back in the 60s, I was aware of some of the serious racial issues and challenges across the country. But on the Lower East Side, it seemed like these challenges and issues were not so obvious. And I think in part because we were so concentrated and we learned to get along. I was raised in a Chinese family environment, and for the same reason I just said, I was able to interact with the other ethnic groups in the schools, in the grocery stores, the laundromats, and parks and playgrounds. And this gave us an opportunity to know each other. In fact, the other ethnic groups also tried to get along through their efforts to communicate to others, regardless of the communications and the English-speaking abilities, but however, through friendships and even simply sitting down outside the apartment buildings, exchanging smiles and providing polite nods to the head. It was a great moment. Now that moment is not about sports or anything like that. I didn't win a national title. I didn't win a state title. I didn't win a big trophy and plaques and things like that, but my lesson in life came about because of sports. And it was about a game of handball. And my Chinese friends and I enjoyed that game, and we played all day, win or lose, and just had a great time doing it. It was played on a one-wall handball court, much like racquetball today. The ball that was used, if some of you may remember, Tony, I don't know where in New York you were from, but they were the pink high bounce Spalding balls, about the size of the racquetball. And this ball was used in a lot of sports: stickball, punch ball, box ball, stoop ball, throw and catch. And there were times where we got a little inventive and started playing fast throw dodgeball. and I'll tell you, even today, I remember how stinging that ball was when I got pegged by the ball from other folks. But that was an important piece of equipment. Now, the game was played volleys and serves, and as you won the volleys, you started scoring points. And whoever reached the score at 21 was declared the winner. And they were played either singles or doubles, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful sport. Now, the courts, City Park, Public Park, it was a first come, first served basis. And for the most part, whoever was there, well, they played first. But there were times where other folks would come in and threw down a challenge for that court. Now keep in mind, there weren't a whole lot of tension just by playing handball. But the tension I do remember was from those that got tired of waiting and those that were on the losing end of the game. But nevertheless, it was a great sport, and my Chinese friends and I played that all day, win or lose amongst ourselves. But one day, a group of Hispanic players came onto the court and threw down their challenge. And as I said, there was nothing strange about that. That was all part of life in the parks. Now, there was a little bit of apprehension, tension, intimidation on our part. We didn't know these guys. And I suspect that there was some apprehension on the part of the Hispanic players as well. For us, we looked at each other and we thought about, well, maybe we'll just pack up and leave. Because these Hispanic players thought we were easy pickings, being Chinese, and also regarded at that time as being on the lower rung of society's ladder. But I suspect that the Hispanic players also had some apprehension because they never played us. And they had the benefit of watching us play the earlier games, but they didn't realize just how challenging it might have been. Well, once we decided that we were going to play, we said it was game on. So in the doubles game that started, it started out with the first volley, first serve, to determine who would start off. And it was just like taking that first tee shot. You got all these folks watching and just trying to see how that game would go. So there we were. It was game on, and the volleys went back and forth, and I can't tell you how many frustrating moments there were, and you learn that really quick when you heard the muted expressions of frustration or the obvious cheers of success. Now, the game went on, and we won that challenge, and we continued to play. Now, we did lose towards the later games, but that was okay. At the end of that first game, and at the end of every game after that, there were fives being exchanged, there were handshakes, and there were verbal expressions of good game. But what was really key in that first game was at the end, the Hispanic players who came to that court and yelled out, "Hey, Chino." All right? And towards the end, that changed where they started using first names. So this was a life's lesson where we realized that throughout the game, that there was an evolution of respect building and an acknowledgement that, hey, these guys are pretty good. In fact, they're beating us. So that went on, and there were times during that day, they even asked us to play other teams. Excuse me. And, originally there weren't a whole lot of tension because the ethnic groups often played within their own groups, and sometimes they would have other members of the ethnic groups playing with their teams. So at the end of the day, we all left, but we left with a sense that any preconceived notions were checked at the sidelines of that court. The apprehension, the intimidation, the fear that we had when they walked onto the court was changed into enthusiasm, engagement, mutual respect, and engagement of the other folks. A lesson in life that taught us that in order to get along, you got to understand and share mutual respect and recognize the people that you're working with, playing with, going to school with, and become an all-around melting pot of personalities and admiration and acknowledgement. This wasn't about winning a large trophy or a national title, but for me, it was a life's lesson that evolved around sports. And it was a lesson that I used with other youth, families, and explained just what that day meant and what the significance was. Today, I still remember that moment, and I share with youth, my family, other adults, schools, my professional workplace, and you know what? In places like this where I'm telling the story. Now, the efforts behind that game certainly had us all check our preconceived notions at the entrance of that court. And it was a great moment in life as we played them. And in fact, as we got to know them more and more, and over the later days and weeks, there was this intercultural family that was being formed and recognized. We were visiting with those folks, my Chinese friends and I. We were invited to their picnics, their feasts, their cultural events, and this is for a later story, because of our age. We did share some cerveza frio. Right? So for those that speak a little Spanish and those that do drink beer, you know what I'm talking about. And especially at that time, Tony, you didn't hear this, we were about 14, 15. But that's another story. So it was just great that we were embraced by this group of players. And I believe that they too had learned a life's lesson at that time, which obviously translated to other days of engagement and embracement. Over 50 years have gone by, and many of these guys have gone off in different directions, just like I have. But that day, that memory continues in the back of my head as one of my greatest moments in sports. Again, not because of a trophy or an award or a title, but the lesson in life that I had learned. Let me close off by saying and stealing a line from Neil Armstrong. Back in the 60s, you remember when he took that first step on the moon and said, "A small step for mankind, for man, a giant leap for mankind." Now, what we accomplished that day may have just been a small step, or maybe even just a small achievement in the big picture. But I felt that we had really made some gains and really felt that we're changing the complexion, and no pun intended, of the games that we play in the park. Today, whenever I go back to the city, I'll walk by those handball courts and see the diversity of the teams playing with or against each other, and other ethnic groups will be joining them. So here's my story. It's not sad but true, but it's true. And hopefully all of you folks will take away the notion of what mutual respect is all about and how you can just go forever in furthering what we believe as people in this country, equality and respect for the other. So thanks very much.